America, talk to me, Lauren Collin, and let us go beyond what you believe to better understand why you believe anything. I am not here to debate. There are plenty of places for speaking right past one another, nor am I here to judge. Here, on the We Unite, We Win podcast, user-generated America series, I will speak to anyone willing to give me an hour of their time to share their clearly stated morals, ethics, religious beliefs, or lack of, and views on humanity that inform their personal approach to culture, politics, and government. The aim of the UGA series is not to change anyone's mind. I am doing this in the hopes that you, the listener, will join me in putting aside your assumptions and listen to the guest for an hour. If the conversation gets you to ask a question about yourself and about your own beliefs and why you believe anything, all the better. I am excited to always be bringing you more of this content. Please consider supporting this work and becoming a paying member at $8 per month by visiting weunitewewin.com. Today's guest is Marc Coyle. Marc, through all the beauties and complexities that make a family, is the grandson of our first ever guest, Wileen Jowers, and is the son of our third guest, Phil Carroll. I am humbled to have 3 generations of one family speak with me and share their story with all of you. Marc is a veteran who served 2 tours in Iraq. The distance between our American ideals and American realities has shaped much of Marc's life. Listen as Marc shares with me where his beliefs come from and how his journey shapes who he is today. Let's chat with Marc Coyle. I am with Marc Coyle on the We Unite, We Win podcast, user-generated America series. I am excited to talk with Marc. He, through the cosmic weirdness of how all of it works, is the grandson of Wileen Jowers, who you all know as the very first guest of the user-generated America series. We've spoken to Wileen's son and Marc's dad, Phil Carroll, who I think you might also hear referenced today as Mike, one and the same person. And in the same way that Phil reached out to me after hearing his mother's podcast, Marc has now reached out to me after hearing his father's podcast. We are very excited to have Marc here today. Welcome, Marc.
Thank you.
Tell us the brief biography. Where were you born? Where do you live now? Tell us some interesting factoids that make Marc Marc.
All right. Okay. I was born in Columbus, Georgia. Well, my father was stationed in Fort Benning. Now, that was not Mike. Mike is my stepdad. All right. My parents got divorced when I was 8 years old. And that's when me and my mother moved down to Georgia from West Point, New York. That's when she met Mike. They had dated for a few years after her divorce before they got married. I was about 10 years old when they had the wedding. I had known that I had wanted to be in the military since I was about 8 years old. Growing up in the Augusta area, we moved to Grovetown when I was about 10 years old. And then we stayed there until I graduated high school. I've always lived never too far from a military base. That's kind of how I was raised. Joining the military after high school, that was, for me, basically my comfort zone. The rules, the regulations, the discipline that I grew up with. I served 6 years in the Georgia Army National Guard. I served 2 tours in Iraq from 2003 to 2004 and from 2005 to 2000. And those experiences, especially since I was in my early 20s, really developed how I think about things nowadays.
Well, let's dive into it. I'm excited to hear about what you were thinking before and what you're thinking now and that journey throughout. At any point, is your happiness and pursuing happiness something that you thought about or currently think about in your life?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's now especially, mostly because when I was a teenager and, early 20s, I really believed in the sacrifice part of being a soldier. And so my own personal happiness, I never really considered. It was always more serving others. That's why I joined the military. It wasn't until, more recently, now I have PTSD. It wasn't until more recently that I've sort of started putting aside that extreme of serving others to my own detriment, and started really acknowledging my own wants and needs. My biggest want, my biggest need is just finding peace.
Peace from the years in Iraq, peace from even before then. So you had an idealism based on sort of how you were raised. It connected with you. You go and serve. That idealism shatters.
Yes, because I was raised around people who, believed in our Constitution. People who were willing to fight, kill, die for it. I was one of those people. That's what I became. And it was actually during the Bush administration, while I was overseas, the passage of the Patriot Act is what really, I would think that was the first thing that really jaded me to how politicians were not necessarily 100% loyal to our Constitution.
Your issues with the Patriot Act being
removal of habeas corpus. That, due process, that's a huge part about our American justice. When the Patriot Act did away with that, being able to arrest people without a warrant, search their homes without a warrant, indefinitely hold them, regardless if they're American citizens or not. And I was raised to believe that our Constitution is not just for American citizens, but for anybody within the borders of our country. It's supposed to be, protect people. That's the spirit of the Constitution. And there's too many people nowadays, especially politicians, lawyers, who are always concentrating on the exact wording and how to bend it to benefit them. But it's about the spirit of that document. It is supposed to be a living document. And I'm an atheist, but by saying that something is living, it has a spirit. Whether you consider that an actual soul or the meaning behind something, that's what a spirit is, especially for that Constitution.
When did that understanding come to being, and how did you come to understand that that is the essence of the United States Constitution?
Well, it's a culmination of living in a society that is based 100% on upholding and defending the Constitution. That right there is first and foremost. That's my base. Then learning in middle school, high school about the Constitution, and then going to college, learning historical events. At one point, I was a history anthropology major, and going through and learning about all those different things and aspects. And then self-education, of course, just reading the Constitution, seeing how it's been applied in the past, and knowing what the values are of our nation originally, what the Army values are. Army values when I was in was loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. And a lot of actions by politicians, by congressmen, by senators, by the president have been an antithesis to all of that.
And a straight line from Bush to Obama to, Trump, to Biden to Trump again? Or do you see that there were different phases over these 23 years?
At a certain point after my tours in Iraq, I started looking at history in a different lens. And you can actually see gradual decline from our original values. To me, it's mostly an integrity issue. People know what was meant by certain things, what the purpose of it was. Instead of saying, oh, well, this is what was meant, we're not going to try and override that. They're like, no, well, this is the exact wording, and we're going to work within the exact wording. How
do you square that idea of individual freedom in a document that the very first draft, approved draft, our original Constitution did not consider everyone a human being? Certainly slaves were 3/5 of a person. Right. They did not have habeas corpus rights. How do you square that ideal versus its practice before you recognized the absolute assault when Bush passed the Patriot Act?
Well, understanding some of the personal history behind the Constitution as well, of the people who actually framed it, wrote it, signed it. The framers of the Constitution themselves didn't want slavery to be around forever. That's why instead of adopting life, liberty, and property, they changed it property to pursuit of happiness. Because at the time, slaves were considered property. If you have a right to property and slaves are property, then you'll have a hell of a time outlawing slavery. So they set it up for the future in order to be able to one day address that change. People think abolitionists only existed back in the mid to late 1800s. It's not true. Abolitionists have been throughout history. There's been lots of people who have been against slavery, and they don't necessarily call themselves abolitionists. That's just a frame. That's just a term that was coined back in the day.
When you were in Iraq and the Patriot Act passed, did you feel that habeas corpus was applied in the sense that whether you were a white man or a black man born here or a Mexican immigrant, potentially undocumented, that up until 2002, 2003, when that passed, you believe like that core element of the Constitution was living for the large, if not all majority of us Americans?
Yeah, I do. I did.
And then when you see like what's happening right now with the, rendition of immigrants who were in the borders to El Salvador, is it just, what's the degree for you from that, which was obviously a real action, to the snooping that started 23 years ago? Is it the same level of rights violation, or has Trump actually taken it to a new level?
I think it's worse, taking it to another level, because, the issues that they had at Guantanamo Bay, absolutely horrible and atrocious, never should have happened. Every single one of those soldiers should have been court-martialed to the fullest extent of the UCMJ, period. Okay? But this is worse. At least we had control over what happened in Guantanamo Bay. We don't have control over what happens in El Salvador.
Right.
And to turn people over to a foreign entity because they're breaking our laws, that's just asking for human rights violations.
It feels very Banana Republic now.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's very Banana Republic. There's not even a kangaroo court involved. It's just ship them over there. Don't necessarily have to have proof. Just, go. And that's not cool. That's one of those things that this can easily, if left unchecked, can lead to this happening to American citizens. It's already unacceptable to have it done to people visiting or living in our country, not citizens.
Where do you live right now?
Wisconsin.
Where in Wisconsin?
Racine.
Do your neighbors feel the same way? Or do you think most of your neighbors are like, they're non-documented, they don't have rights, I don't care what the Constitution says, ship them away?
Well, judging from the signs I've seen in their yards, I don't think they agree with me.
Do you ever have the opportunity to speak with them, or are these the things that go unsaid?
No, I have rainbow flags on the front of my house, so they tend not to talk to me. And in fact, really ignore me most of the time.
When you have this break, you're in the Army, you're in Iraq. And do you start even telling your other fellow soldiers, like, wow, this is bad? Or in the Army, you're just like, this comes down from the president, it gets signed into law, or whatever, again, from Congress, signed into law. The president says this is law now. Did your fellow soldiers just fall in line, or do you think a lot of soldiers are keyed into what you're saying, or even within the armed forces, people are still like, habeas corpus is just for a certain privileged white men and everyone else?
To tell you whether it's a majority or a minority, I couldn't tell you. I do have quite a few friends that agree with me, other veteran friends, guys that are in my group therapy at VA, and others, veterans that I've come across. They agree with me. This isn't about conservative or liberalism. This is about constitutional rights, constitutional protections. This is about protecting our democracy. That a living document is supposed to be an ideal, and yeah, you always fall short of your goals when you live up to perfect ideals and things like that. It's our job to try, and Judging from what's happening recently, they're not even trying.
What do you think it'll take to get back to, instead of receding from the idea, getting back towards the ideal? What do you think will have to happen here in America and or done by the American people who in your own neighborhood disagree with you? They're like, this is fine. You can't say majority minority, so there's somewhere in between. At what point do you think a real majority steps up again and says the Constitution matters, habeas corpus matters, applying it to every single individual in America, the exact same matters?
Honestly, and this is very unfortunate, but in my mind, I don't see these people changing or caring enough about the actual Constitution to be able to apply it to everyone that's not like them. It's people are too caught up in themselves and their own prejudices, their own bigotry. They want a release for all that hatred and anger that they've been carrying inside for them for years. And this is their outlet. They have Trump. They are using Trump as their scapegoat. Trump is using them as his scapegoat. It's a never-ending cycle.
What do you think drives that hate, that need for an other? Especially, it seems to actually be, they're choosing that hate for an imaginary other or an imagined other over their own best self-interest, what would make their actual own material lives and mental lives and well-being better.
I mean, it's actually ingrained in our minds prehistorically to fear the other. And that is a basic human fear. It takes a lot of effort to really overrule your animal instincts. If you're hungry, it takes a lot of concentration, a lot of mental and emotional effort to not eat. Thus, fasting is supposed to be done in most religions as proof that you love a god. Okay? Abstaining from sex when you're horny. It's difficult, but we've had practice over the years, mostly due to freaking prudent religions. But this fear is the same thing as those other two. Exact thing. In order to overcome that fear, you have to deny that part of your animal instinct.
Did you have a journey from seeing other people as others, or do you think you were closer to always seeing humans as just another human walking by?
Being raised on a military base, my first introduction to racism was when my parents got divorced and me and my mom moved down to Georgia. Okay. Before that, it was being in school, in grade school. You got made fun of because you're a Poindexter, a jock, or nerd, whatever. We have white kids, we have Asian descent kids, we have black kids, we have, just everybody, Latino kids, even some kids from Germany with German accents. Nobody was the same. There wasn't one majority over the other. At least that was my experience in grade school. And that was going to school on a military base. I come down to Georgia, and it's a whole different story. White kids only hang out with white kids. Black kids only hang out with black kids. And then there's this little talking behind each other's back. And it's all based on race. And it's like, and this was taught to them by their parents and society that they lived in. Meanwhile, I grew up literally in a melting pot. So it was a very huge culture shock for me when I was exposed to that.
Mark, do you believe that there are multiple races of human beings?
No. Here's my version of it is, according to the human genetics, your skin color is this much. There's more genetic information to determine your eye color than there is your skin color. We have 3 different colors of melanin in our skin, and different concentrations of it are determined how close to the sun, on the earth, how close to the sun your ancestors were. It's pointless to consider somebody of a different color skin a different race, because the way I see race is scientific way of seeing race. Humans are a race. Dogs are a race. Cats are a race. It's
right. Species and race are more of the
species and race are synonymous.
Right. Yeah. You said there's both fear and it's ingrained, but it seems like what it's more like is that the fear is there latent, and you can stoke that fear if you don't ever give it the opposite, which is both the exposure to everyone and an explanation of we are all just people. Like
Yeah.
no one's born hating.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, to give an example, and this is an example that does happen today, you take some people from the Appalachia, you take kids from the Appalachian Mountains. They've only ever known their small community. And yes, there's going to be a lot of cultural fear ingrained into those children of the others. But if you were to have people come from outside that community, even a baby will be afraid initially. And it's a combination of the initial fear, which is your guttural reaction. And then comes in your conscious fear, which is what you've been taught. And so that part right there is what politicians and a lot of these other people do. All that is playing on the initial reaction fear and to keep that going. And it takes a lot of work. I've been learning, at least in my therapy, to do away with some of those initial reactions, or at least not to continue them to go on. If I hear a gunshot, I'm down. And that's my initial reaction. I feel fear. I'm looking around for a threat. My heart's pounding. I'm sweating. I'm breathing faster. But when I look around and I notice where I'm at, what's happening, what's going on, that's the point which I choose to either calm myself down, overcome the fear through knowledge, or I just let my mind do whatever it wants. That's part of PTSD that most people don't understand, is the things that we've experienced in combat, that initial fear, that's always going to happen. That's always going to happen. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot to get out of the mind frame of survival.
There's a difference of some people are willing to work on it and some people aren't. It sounds like you do believe in some plasticity of the mind, right? Like you can learn, no matter how hard it might be, you can learn, you can change your mind. But ultimately, there's no motivation or something is stopping a large chunk of people from seeing everyone else as not an other, if not just a total equal.
The biggest thing against change, against people's willingness to change, is them having to see a necessity to change. If they believe that what they are doing has a use, is useful to them in their life, then they're going to continue doing what they're doing. They're not going to change it just for the sake of change. They need to see a personal necessity in order to change that aspect of themselves.
I would like to, if you're okay with it, kind of move it actually back to your personal necessity. At what point did you know that you had PTSD?
Did I know? Probably since it developed, and like a part of me always knew. I wasn't the same.
This is after the second tour, like totally coming back, or while you're still out in the field?
After I come home. Okay, because you have to understand a lot of things in PTSD, the reaction, the anger, your emotions turning into anger, hiding all of your sadness, all of your despair into anger and letting it out. That's useful in combat. That's useful in theater. Once you get home and you're still acting that way, that's when it's crossed over to PTSD, because now it's negatively affecting your life, your ability to create and maintain relationships and just live a civilian life in peace. That's where that turns in, when your mind cannot leave the battle on the battlefield. Okay. And nobody can just leave the battle on the battlefield, period. I don't care who you are. I don't care what type of training you've had. It's going to take, after a 1-year tour, it's going to take probably several months, if not up to another year, for you to really address a lot of that stuff that's going on. Most post-traumatic stress disorder, people with it, it'll come from a single traumatic event. They have the one traumatic event and they're going to have to work through the issues. And it takes some of those people a year just to process one traumatic event, regardless of what it is, whether it's, witnessing somebody getting murdered or getting raped. These are the same symptoms, and it takes a long time to be able to work through the issues, because there's multiple issues, issues of trust, issues of safety, paranoia, things like that you're going to have to work through. And it takes time to do that. In combat, especially when you're there for 6 months, a year, 4 months, I don't care. You're in this combat zone. You have multiple, I mean, I can't tell you, probably hundreds of events that are traumatic for you. And even with our training, we are still human. We're not machines. Our minds, our psyches still work the same. We've just been trained to hide it on the outside. And so when you see people get killed, when you have to kill people, you see, local Iraqi children burning puppies in a freaking burn pit alive. You see rape victims getting punished for getting raped. There's a lot of moral injury behind a lot of that, because a lot of these things we're told to do nothing about because it's their country and we're not policing it. We're just fighting a war. And it's...
And this is amazing. And thank you for sharing. You come home, this is bottled up. You're explaining in general how it's felt. And thank you for that. Then how many years did you live in that anger and pain before, like you said, you recognize something inside you that wanted to change to now do the work?
I didn't really start seeing a necessity for changing my way of thinking, for addressing my PTSD with therapy, probably until about 2 years ago. I've been living it for about 20 years. So it's, because psychologists like to call it your trauma brain, that part of your brain that holds onto your trauma. And the longer you live with it, the more reasons it can come up with not to get rid of it. So my trauma brain kept telling me, no, Mark, this is all useful. Of course, you're never safe. No one's ever safe. They just feel safe. No one's ever truly safe. So you need to be on the watch. You need to be on guard. Protect yourself. Protect others around you. Always be watchful or remain vigilant. Complacency kills. All of those mantras that were given to me in the military. I kept thinking that they were useful in today's society, but they weren't. They were just preventing me from truly connecting to others and trusting anybody.
Were people reaching out in those 20 years to try and get you to maybe see that? And because you were in that trauma brain, it was just easy to say no? Or was there even just people didn't even want to address it with you because he's leading he might be angry and he might have served, he might have PTSD, but that's his journey and I shouldn't get involved.
For the most part, there wasn't really anybody that said, hey, you need to get help with your PTSD. Okay, maybe 2 or 3 people tops in my entire life from the time that I came back to now. Everybody else would be like, you're such an angry person. Why are you such an angry person? I'm thinking to myself, I'm not an angry person. I have legitimate reasons to be angry at these things. What do you mean it's totally inappropriate to scream at somebody for cutting me in line at Starbucks or something? It's really difficult to explain. There's no true conscious thought process behind all of this. This is all happening behind the scenes.
As that is happening behind the scenes in your conscious mind, you also, we started out, right? Like you had this ideal, like I've been sent here because I'm fighting for this document and there's a universality to it that every human being has the same rights before the law. And we're here in theory, maybe to make sure these Iraqi people at one day also have that right. Maybe not. But then even back at home, it starts that wall crumbles. Does that exacerbate it for you? Did that make it worse?
That's actually a part of a trauma, of one of the traumas that I experienced. I felt very betrayed by my president, by my upper echelon, by the American people for allowing it to happen. Stuff like that really wreaks havoc on your trust in leadership. And in the military, trust for leadership is the only thing you got going for you.
You were already in the National Guard, so I assume you were part of the call-up and you had no choice but to go, right? You didn't volunteer. 9/11 didn't happen and you didn't volunteer so that you could get shipped to Iraq. That was not your plan.
No, I actually went to basic training I graduated basic training August 17th, 2001.
Wow. Okay. With that, but not still not planning a career in the Army. You said that
my initial plan was to, join the National Guard, go to college, get my degree, become an officer, and then serve, become a lifer, basically.
Wow.
That was my initial plan.
Did you make it to college?
Here and there.
Say you were 18 months younger and you're leading the same life. 9/11 happens. Instead of in basic, you're, a junior in high school still.
Mm-hmm.
Time advances the 18 months and you're like, I'm going to sign up today because this has been my lifelong dream, but it's the same day that George Bush signs the Patriot Act. Would you have ever gone at that point? Or do you think at that point you would have said, I'm not doing this?
Honestly, can't tell you. A lot of the things, a lot of these instances happened when I was older and have experienced a hell of a lot more. So to ask me if a completely unexperienced Mark would have made the same decision as the slightly more experienced Mark, I really can't tell you. I remember some parts of being younger, but I can't truly enter into my own mindset when I was 17.
Right.
Before I joined the military, because I don't remember it. That's a part of it, is when you go through all that stuff, it's so changing of experiences that it's very difficult to really remember what you were like, who you were completely before all of that. I know an outline of what I was back then. I was a lot more gentle. I was a lot sweeter of a person. I was a lot more naive, gullible, if you want to say that even. I was trusting. I was able to find peace just sitting in the woods, or even be at peace in a large group of people out at the lake. Those are facts, though. And I can somewhat remember the feeling of being at peace, but I haven't been able to feel any of that since 2003 when we invaded Iraq.
It's safe to say you were not alone.
No, I was not alone.
What was the difference maybe of someone who got help earlier versus 20 years on, or potentially even, because I'm sure there's still some of your peers who still haven't gotten help? What might have been a global thing that could have helped everyone not have to wait 2 decades to get help?
Honestly, I think if you were to make therapy, whether individual or group, after leaving a combat zone, mandatory for at least 6 months afterwards, that would at least get soldiers to admit that the things that they witnessed and did affected them. Because when I came back, I was all about, this doesn't affect me. No, I can live with it. I'm good. I'm not one of those crazy vets out on the street yelling out, shouting at people for no fucking reason. I'm not that statistic. But the fact of the matter is, whether you want to admit it or not, you are.
You early on said you are an atheist. I heard that from your stepfather, Phil, that he's an atheist.
Yeah. We're a little bit different types of atheists.
Yes. You're very different types of people. And I think that will absolutely come across clearly to our audience. At what point did you know you were an atheist? Was it a journey, or was it kind of like how you saw people as people just because you were raised that way from the get-go?
No, it was a journey. There was one point when I was younger. I truly believed, like 100%, like all through my teen years, I truly believed. And even the first part of Iraq, even while I was in the first part of my first tour, I really hardcore believed. But then I just really started questioning the validity of the goodness of God after seeing so much death and destruction, so many people in poverty, children, innocents, things like that happening. How can a God be good and allow this to happen? And, it went from there to, just the basic concept of it, to then looking at all the other aspects of what God is supposed to be. And just coming up with logical conclusions that God can't be any of this. This God doesn't exist. Some people would call me and would say that I'm agnostic, not atheist. Mike would call me agnostic. I don't believe in a God. I do completely disbelieve in the Judeo-Christian Muslim God. Period. That God, Allah, Yahweh, whatever you want to call him, does not exist. The gods of ancient Greece, ancient Rome, freaking Norse gods, Egyptian gods, don't exist in my mind. However, that doesn't mean that there isn't a very powerful being in this universe that could exist. Logically, this very powerful being in the universe that exists wouldn't give one rat's ass about us.
Part of it sounds like the being so great that you can't actually even fully conceive of the being.
Correct. It would be the equivalent of us being interested in the personal lives of amoeba. Are we interested in learning about amoeba and how it functions and how it evolves and stuff like that? Yeah, we are. Yeah, we are. But whether it wants to date another amoeba, we don't care. If one amoeba eats another, still not a big deal.
That might be the greatest metaphor I've heard, Mark, yet for, like you said, that agnosticism / atheism.
Right.
Tell me a little bit more about what shaped that belief in God before the journey. Was it both parents? Was it the church you were in? What church were you in? Were you always in one church? Did you read your own Bible? Like what did that God look like, and how did that God form before that God got torn down?
I'd been to many churches. I'd actually been exposed to many different religions when I was a kid. My mom was always wanting me to find my own path. She didn't really want to push any one belief on me. I was 18 or 19, maybe even 17 when I found what was called a non-denominational church. It was an evangelist type church, evangelism. You had a few people there that tried to speak tongues and all that good stuff. Tongues. It was all supposed to be peace. And I mean, the way I understood it as a kid, it did. There was a lot of correlation between the Army values, the American values, and Christianity. To me, it actually correlated. But I wasn't very knowledgeable in the Bible back then. I didn't know that the Bible actually supported slavery. If you're a slave, be a good slave. Serve your master. If you're a master, be a good master to your slave. All that good stuff. The glazed over version of the Bible. The glossy version.
And that's the version from the pastors, and they're like, I'm going to explain it to you. You don't even have to bother reading it. How does that glazed over version become, for better or worse, what seemed to an outsider, the mostly accepted version?
Some of the churches I was involved with, especially that church, was always, number one, it wasn't very political. Okay. They didn't really preach about politics or anything like that. They preached forgiveness. They preached loving each other, your neighbor, your enemies, all of that good stuff. Invite everyone to church. Doesn't matter who they are, what they're dressed like. It was a very progressive type church. They just had this overarching thing of complete equality between everyone. And that's what drew me to it, because that's what I already believed in. I already believed in equality, equity. I believed in no one is greater than the next person. That's what I still believe now. And so that's kind of what drew me to that particular church. There's been other Baptist churches and stuff in the area. They would preach hellfire, damnation. Don't even talk to gay people because they might turn you gay. What? It's no. I mean, I got tired of that because it eventually turns into spouting hatred. And I wasn't about that. I didn't consider that Christian back then.
You recognize this thing. You have a version of the Bible and God that speaks to you and matches your pretty universalist ideas of humanity. Mm-hmm. But you see and you even experience these other churches that are the polar opposite. Or would you actually try and have conversations and be like, I don't think that's what the Bible is. I think it's this more universalist version?
I've tried asking questions and discussing things with pastors, but it usually gets met with, "Oh, you're such a cute little boy. We know better than you." It's along those lines.
And then basically some people accept that answer and that authority.
Yeah.
And some people go, wait, that's not enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't really big on challenging authority for the sake of challenging authority. I was always raised that there's nothing wrong with asking a question if you don't know the answer, or questioning things, the validity of things. That right there, especially when you ask a Catholic priest a freaking question. I remember Mike saying that you see some Republicans just glaze over.
Mm-hmm.
I was asking a Catholic priest about sainthood and praying to saints, the concept behind that. And his eyes did literally gloss over, and like he was reciting a line that was memorized to answer this specific question, which leads me to believe that Catholic priests have metrics that they have to fulfill, just like any other corporation.
I was actually going to ask that even about the other pastors, that not answering you is job protection in many ways.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, it's the whole, you need to accept this on faith. It's like, well, I accept the concept of God and Jesus and stuff on faith. It's these details that I'm wondering about that just don't make sense. So no, you have to accept all of it on faith. You have to accept my word on faith, but you're not God. I'm his messenger. These are the types of answers that you get.
What was the journey to move to this agnosticism, like you said, of maybe there is no God, maybe there's no highest being, but maybe there is a highest being. And again, if this highest being is here, is just here. Like, what was that journey between Iraq and getting to that point?
Well, so at a point where I was willing to say that I don't believe in this, by that point, I already started feeling lonelier because I knew that I'd started disbelieving in the aspect of a God. When you believe that there's a God watching over you, you don't feel lonely. Even when you're completely alone, you don't feel alone because that spirit is with you. Okay? And I mean, that's like placebo effect. The same type of effect. The same thing happens there. But when you then realize, well, this God can't exist, then that God's no longer with you. And so you do feel a little bit more alone, a little bit more isolated in general. But then, like for me, I was okay with it. It was along the lines of, I have a very scientific way of thinking. And I am 100% comfortable with the idea that my hypothesis was wrong. And that's about everything. Everything. Well, hey, I might be wrong, but if I am, I'm wrong. Just be secure in that.
What is the foundation, I guess, of those beliefs within agnosticism? Earlier, you went through all like the virtues of being in the army. Is it like those virtues that sustain you, or kind of what sustains that foundation of your ethics and morals?
I basically realized that I haven't had peace for the last 20 years in my mind, in my life, period. And I want that again. That's what caused me to really want to seek therapy and change how I was handling things. Something had to change. As far as like my beliefs as agnosticism goes, not really affecting that decision. It's really, I just want to be able to be comfortable again. I can't be comfortable. I'm always on edge. I'm always looking around me, searching rooftops, bending around corners to make sure nobody's waiting for me. I mean, it's not a way to live.
I'm glad for you that you have really leaned into and are doing that journey and making that process now for yourself. And Mark, you will get there.
Yeah. You're hoping.
Mark, we're going to switch gears here. It's going to actually take us back to the beginning of the conversation as far as our government, but it's going to be a couple steps to get there. And the first step, though, is actually still talking about virtues and vices. Do you believe that greed is good?
No. Greed is not good.
Do you believe that excessive wealth is good?
No.
Do you believe that the billionaires and centimillionaires that exist in our country right now, the centimillionaires, is about 10,000 of them, they have $100 million in cash assets or more.
Yeah.
Do you believe that they have earned all of that wealth?
Not completely, no.
What is in your mind then? What is that difference of what they earned versus what is truly excessive and unearned?
Okay. I mean, the thing about earning is putting forth the work necessary to get your compensation. Okay. If I'm a farmer and I am, let's say, a sustenance farmer, I'm growing corn, I'm growing tomatoes, I'm growing green beans, I'm growing, I'm raising a few cows and pigs. Okay. So I'm going to use whatever I need from that to basically provide for myself and my family so we can eat and survive. Anything beyond that, I've earned the right to sell it and then keep that back as some savings for rainy days, emergencies, things like that. That right there is a good example of earning extra off of your labors. Now, as far as owning businesses go, when your goal is just to make money, that's your resources. That's how you're going to provide for your family and yourself. That's how you pay for your house, your food, your car, all of that stuff. So ideally, you would take what you need first, and then anything left over, you'd put back, save it up to allow your business to grow. You want security. Okay, you don't have to worry about money and hard times and stuff like that. Once you get to a point where you no longer have to worry about hard times and survival, at that point, you get to the size of your business to where you are no longer just responsible for yourself. You are now responsible not just for your employees either. You're responsible for the local economy because your decisions now affect that entire area. And so whether you want to address that responsibility or not, accept it or not, that's a personal choice. But that responsibility is still there. People who just continuously hoard resources, they are ultimately responsible for those who do not have resources because there is no possible way for them personally to use said resources. That's basically the initial burden of being rich, is you do have that responsibility to the public, to your immediate vicinity, and the richer you are, the larger the scale of your responsibility is. A lot of these billionaires and centimillionaires are not living up to that responsibility.
You can say they're greedy, and greed is a human nature. You probably cannot outlaw greed. I agree with you that the hoarding is what ultimately destroys the rest of the community. Mm-hmm. Then do you think the answer is as simple as taxing that excessive wealth and returning it to the community, or would you have a different way of extracting the excessive wealth and getting
ideally they do it on their own, but since they're not, taxing them at a higher rate, just like we did back in the 70s, 80s, really before the 80s.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Taxing them at those extra high rates would help the economy a lot more.
Do you think your neighbors in Racine would agree with you? In the more general sense, by the community's voting, they would seem to be saying that they're okay with the hoarding. Like they're not choosing their own self-interest to tax these people. They're specifically voting for people who, if anything, are going to continue to untax them.
Well, a lot of these people are greedy that vote like that. A lot of them have this hope in their head that maybe one day they'll become that rich, and they don't want to have to give up things if and or when that happens for them. It's dangling this carrot. The people who are already uber rich are saying, hey, here's this carrot. You might be able to get it. And if you are part of passing the laws that have to make you give up a majority of this carrot, then you won't be able to keep the whole carrot for yourself. Join us. But in all actuality, the chances of a person actually receiving that, getting to that point, is slim to none, especially without, stuff that's illegal, like, economic collusion and, knowing people,
right?
Creating backdoor deals. I mean, there's lots of situations in this country that could not legitimately exist without those illegal things happening behind closed doors.
The tax code makes many of those things that might not be illegal legal, as the ultra wealthy find ways to continuously reduce their tax burden. Everything's electronic. Most assets are known where they are. Do you feel in your gut that, I assume as someone who mostly earns wages, I'm making an assumption, that your wages are the form of your wealth, and that your wealth then is taxed at a much greater percentage than someone whose wealth comes from potentially some wages, but mostly from capital gains or royalties and rents? So you feel you're paying a much higher percentage of your wealth than those ultra wealthy pay as a percentage of all their forms of wealth.
Yeah, I mean, you use the term wealth. Okay, to me, wealth is built. Wealth is extra. My wealth is not taxed. My entire income is taxed. Their entire income is not taxed. That's the two different things.
You would find a world where all of their stuff was taxed the same as how you are taxed would be a fair world, right?
Yeah, exactly. If tax laws were to be made to where billion-dollar corporations were not only paying 2% of their profits in taxes, if they went much higher than that, then we'd be able to find a lot more money for our country. We wouldn't be carrying all these deficits and stuff over into the future and waiting for the next generation, Gen Zers, or whatever the next generation after that's going to be called. We're not thinking about future generations. My grandparents was the generation that stopped thinking about future generations. They were only thinking about here, now, me, period. When we should be thinking generations in advance. We can only think of ourselves for some odd reason right now. We've been going backwards. Our distant ancestors, the revolutionaries, were thinking generations ahead of time, generations beyond their own existence for the betterment of this society. And we have lost sight of that.
Say we were to regain sight of that. Would that include things like universal health care, universal education, making sure that every single job pays a wage that allows you to feed yourself, house yourself, and clothe yourself?
Yes, to all of that. Yeah. I mean, that right there is just not common sense. It's sense. The whole universal health care. You have the conservatives like, well, I don't want to pay for somebody who doesn't work to go to the hospital. Like, all right, so you're paying $800 per paycheck for you and your family to have health care, when you could actually knock that down to $100 a month, $200 a month. Your whole family's covered, but you don't want to pay for a poor person to go to the hospital. That's
right. Your taxes go up. So you paid $100 more in taxes, but the rest of your paycheck, you brought $700 more home.
Yeah.
So if you see this clearly, I see this clearly, but there's no politicians, Democrat or Republican, no one says this out loud. Or do you think it gets said out loud and then others?
No, it doesn't.
Sure it doesn't get said out loud. So how do we get to say
they get told by their public speaker advisors, don't confuse people with numbers. Don't confuse people. You'll just confuse them. It'll get misunderstood and you'll lose your election. They're about winning elections. They're about winning approval. And if you confuse people with too many things, then they're not going to understand you and they're not going to vote for you. But when you put things into simple terms, you can use low numbers to make examples. You can take that $100. I mean, and $800 for a family of three for health insurance. You can understand $800.
The United States pays in healthcare for its two public entities, which is the VA and Medicare, Medicaid, is already, before you put private insurance on it, it's already 25% more than the next highest country before you add another. Like, we're so far ahead on what we spend. As someone who receives that care, like, you're happy with that care. Yes. Like, what my understanding is what the VA has become is it's actually a decent vehicle for delivering care. Like, this is a model you're like, I live this, and it's better than your private insurance in so many ways.
And every VA is different. Unfortunately, each VA hospital is its own entity. So they're run totally differently. They don't all operate exactly the same. The one here in Milwaukee is excellent, especially for the mental health. The mental health doctors there, you can tell they actually care about us as people. They're not just checking boxes. They're actually trying to help us through all of these things that we're going through. Not every psychologist or psychiatrist is like that. Most of them are just like, well, hey, you need to do this, this, and this, instead of listening to a soldier. It is kind of hard to explain sometimes the difference between finding somebody that truly cares versus somebody that's just trying to wait until the clock's up.
In that American psyche that you see this clearly as a way forward, and lots of Americans do, but apparently just enough Americans don't see that they can be healthier, wealthier, safer. What do you think it is in the American psyche that stops that group from going, oh, this is actually something that is ours and we can take it, and we keep deferring to saying no to our own betterment?
They keep believing these falsehoods, these fallacies that healthcare is going to decline if we stop privatizing it. Privatization and making money at the top of the line healthcare. But it's not. When you're looking at bottom line numbers, when you're looking at making a profit, you want your doctors to see as many patients. Well, if you want your doctors to see more patients so you can make more money, then those doctors aren't paying enough attention to each of those patients to properly diagnose them. And they're not running the proper tests, and they're not doing the proper procedures. They're always looking for cost cutting in order for that profit to be up here. And if the profit falls down here, oh, no, can't do that. Privatization of healthcare is actually to the detriment of public health. It needs to be a nonprofit organization. It needs to be a nonprofit industry, period.
Like you said, you have to get Americans to see it's actually the net benefit, and yet we can't seem to get there.
Beyond that, you need to get Americans to see that capitalism is not the best, and socialism and communism are not forms of government. Those are actually economic policies. You're confusing these things with autocracies that they're most known for. The autocracy is the form of government that is choosing an economic policy of either communism or socialism. Our society would not be working if it weren't for socialism. Private ownership is retained. Government creates regulations on how they can conduct business. It doesn't mean they have a totalitarian control over how business conducts business. It just means that they make regulations. That is socialism. That is what we have right now for the most part.
Can I challenge you on something? May I?
Yeah.
Not a debate. I'm just curious your thinking. When you were saying that regulation is socialism, why is regulation socialism versus versus capitalism having just its own regulated version?
Yeah, well, regulated capitalism, I mean, it's not really capitalism in its truest form. When I say capitalism, I'm talking 100% free market capitalism.
Laissez-faire, but that's the point. Even within capitalism, there's multiple forms of capitalism.
There is.
And what we keep getting is this extreme, what was tried in the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s.
Right.
We keep getting refed this extreme form that you exactly said, this free market laissez-faire.
What makes it socialism is that these regulations are designed for society. It's actually in the name.
A Marxist would say socialism is no cash, no private property, no religion. There's even no state. That's a Marxist version. But in America, we say there's this in between socialism, which is like the regulation of capitalism. And I'm curious why you think socialism that is.
Yes, socialism light. You see, Marxist socialism envelops all aspects of life, not just economically. And just pure economic socialism is just basically private ownership is retained and the government sets the rules on how you conduct business. Without it, we wouldn't have minimum wage. We wouldn't have workers' rights. We wouldn't have safe working conditions. Corporations could make their office workers pay for the paper and ink that they use. So this stuff that happened back over 100 years ago. Textile companies would make their people pay for needles that they broke. It's unfair.
If socialism becomes the hang-up word that scares people from those things, how do you explain to them? Is there a way to explain to them?
I mean, the best way is just to properly educate people on exactly what these words mean. And that's the biggest thing, is because they're improperly used all the time. If people were to educate themselves on what these things actually are and the differences between how they were used throughout history by different countries and different forms of government, then there wouldn't be so much, socialism, communism. I mean, if you look at the TV show Star Trek, and yeah, that's fantasy. But if you look at Star Trek, you have democracy, socialism, communism, all working together and making a workable society that's able to be more effective in progressing socially and technologically.
You clearly see government has a role in coming up with rules that create competitiveness and fairness so that every human being within that society is seen as an equal. You think these are good uses of government?
Yes. The good use of government is basically assisting the people with protecting their rights to exist, their rights to speech, their rights to just have an idea. That's the purpose of the government, is to serve the people. That was the purpose of the military, is to serve the people.
And right now you feel your government does not serve the people?
No. They serve some people.
Let us see if we can get it back to your vision of serving as many, if not all of us. Marc, if you could give Americans anything, politically, socially, economically, culturally, inside their own hearts, what is that one thing that you would do today for all of America?
If I could give them anything, inside their heads, inside their emotions. Oh, so much. I know Mike said he would give empathy, and I can see that. People do need empathy. But I'll go a different route. I will go moral courage. The courage to do the right thing, to do what is right. I would give that to people because it is almost non-existent in this country. There are a lot of people who are too afraid to do the right thing because they might go to jail, or they might lose friends, or they might lose family, or they might be made a target of. That ability to stand up for what is right, to stand up for your values, your morals, that's what separates soldiers from civilians. We have the fear of being cast out a lot of times for our beliefs. I had the fear of being demoted for standing up and saying, "Hey, sir, this is wrong." But I did it anyway because I had courage. I had moral courage. And that's something I wish more Americans had.
A powerful statement, Marc. I know you said that you don't necessarily connect to a lot of the people of Racine, but if you could give the people of Racine their one thing, what would it be for those neighbors, that community, that city that you live in?
Understanding. Being able to understand that would be related to empathy. But it's beyond feeling for another person. It's understanding, being able to fully take in a person's situation and understand what they're going through. And that's what I would give.
And you think that would transform Racine in a way that you would find to be the positive direction?
Yeah, I do. If they could understand each other, each other's positions and each other's past, what they're going through, then I think there would be a lot more of a community, as opposed to just a whole bunch of people living next door to each other.
Marc, what is it that you want for yourself if you could give yourself one thing in this universe?
Peace. Not see half the stuff in my head that I see every day, all night, every night. No, just peace.
I understand. Thank you for being so honest and sharing. And I hope you do find it. I think you will. It's a journey and you will.
Yeah.
Marc, thank you for sharing everything, for being honest in your answers, being open to the questions, being thoughtful in your responses. I just want to say thank you for being here on the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
As Marc works on finding peace for himself, he also wishes that America would wake up to do the hard work of finding its own peace. His call for each of us to act with moral courage is one of the most powerful messages I have ever heard. I am grateful for Marc sharing the morals, ethics, religious beliefs, or lack of, and views on humanity that informs his approach to culture, politics, and government. I am excited to always be bringing you more of this content. Please consider supporting this work and becoming a paying member at $8 per month by visiting weunitewewin.com. Come back for the next episode to find out our next stop in user-generated America. No fear, only love.